Welcome back to Hot Rod Guy Garage. This is going to be another episode on this 2.3 turbo budget build. So let's get into it. Follow me along through that intro and I'll be back. So alright guys, I have got parts ordered for this 2.3 turbo block. So we need to get this thing ready and cleaned up, and all the stuff cleaned up and put somewhere where it'll stay clean until our parts arrive so we can assemble this thing. So there's a few things we're going to have to do to get started. I'll flip around and show you. Well, first off, we're going to have to get these main studs out here. I've done went in here this morning and I cleaned all the old gasket material off everything, and as you see, it's fairly clean, but we're going to have to clean this a little further than this. And we need to remove this coolant drain plug and this oil galley plug right here. Back to the auxiliary shaft bushings from our last video. There's an oil hole, and it's right about right in here somewhere. This auxiliary shaft bearing is not lined up correctly with any hole. That back one back there, I don't know if I can show you, but it is lined up. I did come in here this morning with Scotch Brite and hit these a little bit, and the auxiliary shaft goes in and out and turns smoothly now. But we're going to have to try to get this one out and see what happens. If not, I'll order a new set of bearings and we'll just put a new set in it. But let's see if we can get this one out, starting this video off. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to use a bearing and seal driver right here. And this one fits the outside diameter of that bearing very well. And I'm just going to try to tap this thing through. Try to do it without damaging the bearing. And then I can bring you guys in here and we can really access what is going on here with both this journal, the bearing, and oil holes. As you can see, there is a groove in here, so some misalignment's not really going to affect anything. But if you look, this thing is very, very dirty on the backside. So all that dirt and funk has got into all our oil passages. And as you can see right here, our oil hole is right there. And I would preferably like to line that oil hole up with this large groove. And any excess oil will go around through that channel to our secondary groove. So the other one's lined up good. I don't see no issues there. But this one, like I said, we got, you see that. I'm not real sure this thing was clean good when it come from whatever machine shop it went to the first time. So let's see if I can't get that journal cleaned up. And I'm just going to spray that with some brake cleaner for right now. We'll see if we can't get this knocked back in. Or I may just go in there and knock the second one out too and leave them out until we get this block fully cleaned. Actually, probably a better idea to leave it out until we get the block fully cleaned, because we're going to have to use a degreaser on this block, and degreaser will attack the aluminum bearings. So let me see if I can get this other one out and I'll be back. So I got both those out. I went in here and I marked the second one. As you see, these are new. They're in pretty decent shape. I marked this one 1 and the one that come out of the second journal 2, because like cam bearings, these are also not consistent size. So you gotta have the right ones in the right positions or they won't fit correctly. So let's get these main studs out of here. I'm gonna put you guys on time lapse. I'm just gonna take an Allen wrench in the end of them, back them out like you would a bolt. So we need to take out these oil galley plug and the coolant drain plug for the lower block. These are an 8mm Allen in this one. Those main studs, I don't know, it almost looks like I put thread sealer on it. They were tightened completely down the block. With an ARP stud, you shouldn't go in there and tighten these up. You should just run them down until they touch. They should technically be loose in the block. So, let's see if we can't get these pipe plugs out. Looks like they're gonna go. We'll get those out. You don't ever want to put together a used motor that you went this far down, that's had this much dirt in it. You don't ever want to leave any plug in it. I am going to leave the freeze plugs in it, or the expansion plugs as people call them, on the side of the block, because I'm not putting new ones in it. This is going to open up our galleys. I can clean the coolant passages out just fine. My concern right now is with the oil passages. I want to make sure there's none of that rust or nastiness inside these. So from here, I'm going to take a cone, well, I'm going to knock you guys over. But I'm going to take a cone style wire brush, and where some of this water's run down in this block on its way to the oil pan, we got some nasty, kind of crusty stuff down in here. So I'm going to take this wire brush, I'm just going to go down in here and knock the flaky stuff off in here. It don't have to be perfectly clean, but you don't want anything that can break loose to get down in your stuff. And there's also some weld splatter down here in this block where they weld that bracket back on the oil pump pickup tube. So I want to make sure I break all that loose. It's highly predominant in this area and this area right here. Your oil pickup tube bolts on right here. So it makes sense. And I'm also going to take this wire brush and just kind of, anywhere I see flaky rust or staining, I'm not going to hit it hard. And I'm not going to get down in here. I'm just going to go in there and just kind of hit that a little bit. And next I'm just going to take one of these little bristle pads for a little small drill arbor. I put a bolt through this and attached to a drill. This is just kind of like a wire brush, but it's kind of like sandpaper too. It's kind of fine, it's kind of coarse, it's not going to hurt anything. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to clean all these other surfaces. And you just want to make sure this stuff is clean. Any of this old residual rust can dislodge. But this isn't coarse enough to actually sand away at the block. It's just coarse enough to kind of knock the roughness off. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same up here at the front. And as you can see, you can't bear down on it because I've left that bolt loose. And I just want to go in here and get any loose rust or paint or anything along that line loose. So let's get this thing rolled over, and I'm just going to roll it on one side for now. I want to clean on this side of the block. I want to make sure I get anything loose off of it that might, make a mess. got another jacket plug right here, and I'm gonna go ahead and take it out. I'm not going to use this to get down the deep little cracks and crevices. I'll switch to a smaller brush. And I just realized you guys couldn't see back there, but there's another plug right here that these come out too, and it's going to be the same 8mm hex. And I'm going to switch to a slightly more worn little comb wire brush to really get down here in some of these places that you can't get to. And it's really good for cleaning out stuff like this distributor hole. And it's small enough at the tip it can get down in some of these bolt holes. And your hole for your breather filter that's over here by your oil filter. You just want to make sure all this stuff's good and clean, guys. Doing this route that we are. I've already cleaned the top of the deck a little bit this morning. Now I'm going to flip it up and see if there's anywhere that I may have missed. Because we are going to paint this motor and I don't want any flaky stuff, so now we're going to roll it on the other side and just repeat this process over here. And go ahead and, since this worked on my drill, I'm going to go ahead and so, alright, I got all this stuff wire brushed off, cleaned up, all the loose flaky rust knocked off of everything and the clumped on dirt where it sat. So, at this point, we're ready to start cleaning this thing up. And I'm going to have to go over here and find the board brushes so we can clean these out outside, but we're doing pretty well at this point. And I don't know if you can hear it or not, I've got the air compressor running outside because we're going to have to blow any water that we put in this thing out. I'm going to roll this thing outside, hit it with some degreaser, scrub it super well inside and out and every orifice. Then we're going to bring it back inside. We're going to blow it out really good, and we're going to coat everything that's raw metal with some WD-40. You can never have this stuff too clean, guys. you literally want to be able to wipe this thing down with a white towel and not have any transfer. So keep cleaning until it wipes out clean. So I got our block rinsed up really good. Got it blown out really good. I sprayed it down with brake cleaner and blew it off too. I sprayed it full of WD-40, blew it out. And I've got the oil pan out here. All the rust that was on the inside of it, I put some of that crappy Rust-Oleum rust converter on it. Hopefully it'll finish eating the rest of that stuff off. So I flip it around, I'll show you where we're at. And we still got a bunch more cleaning to do. So I got this soaking down with some of this. It looks like it's actually working. I've got this dried out, cleaned up. All our bores are clean. I treated all this bare metal stuff with some WD-40 to keep it from flash rusting. So I think our block is pretty good. And it's a little while later. I got that pan cleaned out and sprayed down with some WD-40. It actually cleaned up pretty darn decent. And the rest of the stuff actually worked on that better than it did on our doors on our 66 Mustang. But you've not seen that video at the point I'm filming this, but you will by then. Worked good on that. And I got all this dried out. And I think at this point, we're ready to at least get this block painted. I don't like to leave after I wire brush something. I don't like to leave all this stuff raw. So let's get this stuff taped up. I'm going to tape up the deck and, you know, some of these important things. Up here, I'm just going to kind of tape around our bolt holes and pattern. I'm not going to be real worried about not getting paint on like the water pump flange. You know, I am going to tape off in the middle of these bolt holes here where our front cover bolts on, because this is exposed oil. So is behind our auxiliary shaft plate, it's exposed oil. You don't want paint in anywhere that oil's going to get onto it, because it'll eventually come off and it'll get in your oil and it'll kill your bearings and your motor. Kind of like what I was trying to get all that rust out. That stuff will eventually dislodge, guys, and this thing will be junk at that point. So let's get this thing taped up and we'll spray a little paint on it. So I hit it with a little automotive grade primer just to help adhere to that base that was already there on that engine block when we wire brushed it and hit it with the little sanding wheel. So I just put a light coat on it. And some of you noticed that I didn't quite tape these edges up tight. There's a reason for that too. But got us a coat of primer on there. I'm going to let that cure for just a little while. The way it's fully dried out. And then I'll be back when it comes time to paint it. But first, let me flip this thing around. The reason I didn't tape all of it up, I will go back in here. I want soft lines. I don't want to tape off 100% of the gasket surface. I want to be able to go back in there with a little reducer on the towel and kind of wipe that paint back instead of having a sharp line. Because if you miss a spot, guys, it's going to start rusting there and get under your paint, and that stuff's going to start falling off. So the way I like to do it, I'll just put some little towels in the open holes. You know, I'll loosely tape up the deck. I don't even tape up the bottom of them. I'm going to leave this block turned straight up and down. Overspray's going to fall. It shouldn't rise up into, you know, your main journals and stuff. And I've already sprayed that stuff down with WD-40 anyway. So doing it this way gives you a soft line around all the edges. Wipe it back with some thinner, just to the gasket surface, and you're good. So I'm going to let this thing cure out a little while. I'm going to decide what color I'm going to paint this, and then I'll be back. And Daisy would like to remind you about our shirts down in our merchandise store. She's been outside in her little, she's got a new cat condo outside too. She's nice and staticky. So at this point our primer's cured out. I have the paint we're going to use sitting out in the sun heating up. I am going to rattle can this with some engine enamel. Anytime you spray anything on the engine block or cylinder head, oil pan, you know, anything engine that's going to be high heat, put as little paint on it as you need to cover your surface. That's why I sprayed this with a light coat of primer, a good grade of automotive primer. It will adhere to what we had already abraded on the base, and it gives us a good even surface to get a good even color coat. So let me go ahead and grab this paint out of the sun and I'll be back. Now we got this thing untaped. This is what I meant by soft lines. You take that reducer and you kind of come up here where your gasket's going to sit, and you can't even feel a lip here. You know, done the same around here where our auxiliary shaft goes in. Same with the oil filter. I'll just burn it back with the reducer all the way to the edge. I come in here where our breather goes in, done the same thing. Distributor, same thing. Fuel pump. I went ahead and painted our little front cover up there. Since this is a budget kind of project, I'm just using paint I had around here at the shop. And technically it should be aluminum, but you know, I had some cast iron, so I sprayed it with some cast iron. So paint looks pretty good. And literally guys, that is one dust coat and one full coat. And you did see me flip it over, and I just kind of done that where I could hit the bottoms of all these bosses and make sure that we didn't have any bare spots as we go. So it's looking pretty snazzy, or at least it is to me. And if anybody's curious about the color or what I used to paint it, this right here. I used TrendStar 2-in-1 primer on the block, light dusting. Then I went over it with the Duplicolor engine enamel in a dark Ford blue right here, which is part number DE1606. This is the closest thing you can get to the vintage old Ford blue that's dark. It actually looks good. Most of the other stuff is super bright and incorrect for, you know, most Ford applications. And it is definitely not correct for a 2.3 turbo. But I had it, didn't cost me nothing. Same with the paint. And you know, like I said, this is a budget build, guys, and we'll go over when I get my parts in exactly kind of what we're going to have in this engine as far as the getting assembled. I've got to kind of break down what I actually do have in it, because I bought this in a parts lot and I've done a little trading too, so I've got to kind of factor those things in also. But this one's kind of a rare case where it was brand new, but with a used motor. If you pull it apart and it all looks good, crank's pretty smooth, you know. The bores don't have no ridge or anything in it. You can surely run it home, re-ring it, put some new bearings in it, oil pump. You know, you might have a little more in it than what I have in this, but it's going to be pretty much the same process. So, got our oil pan painted, I got our auxiliary shaft cover cleaned up and painted, I've got our fuel pump plate cleaned up and primered, and I'm starting to clean up some of the random bolts. What I have here is this little reducer and a cup. I just want to get all that oily, nasty residue off of them. So I'm going to let them soak in here for a little while. These are our ARP main studs. Just want to soak in this reducer and break some of that stuff down while I finish painting some of this other stuff in the background here, guys. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to separate all our important stuff and our non-important stuff. Important stuff meaning our old main bearings, you know, our auxiliary shaft bearings, the shaft, the oil pump. And I'm just going to take this stuff, I'm going to put it in some reducer and get all the grease and gunk off of it, get that all cleaned up, and then I'll be back with that. So you don't have to use reducer, guys. You can use brake cleaner, you can use gasoline, diesel, kerosene, whatever you feel comfortable cleaning your parts with. I like to use something pretty nasty like a reducer, because I know it will take all the nasty stuff off. Lacquer thinner would work fine too, so would acetone. But this stuff evaporates and it's not real good to have your skin in it. So if you do this, wear gloves. So yeah, it's a bunch of cleanup work, guys. But once we get all this stuff cleaned up, we're not going to have to do it again. Because I'm going to get all this stuff cleaned up and bagged in bags. And when our parts come, we can start putting this thing together without having to clean in between, or, you know, clean pieces up one at a time. So, you know, I'm going to clean the bolts up in some reducer. I'm obviously not going to put the bearings and, you know, main caps and our rods and pistons and that stuff. Our pistons are still soaking in some diesel over here, and probably need to check them and see if anything's broke loose. So the diesel has definitely turned colors in here, and it looks like our rings are starting to kind of break loose. The diesel won't hurt this stuff. And I did pull one of these out here earlier and took the oil ring off of it. I've been just kind of working around with it. I did order a new set of piston rings. I just didn't know how much I trusted those after being rusted up, and this is the one I took the oil ring off of. But all the rings have freed up just by soaking them in this overnight. And if they still stick when you do this, you can take a little light mallet. I'm not going to say beat on these things, because if you dent this piston, it's game over. You crack this piston, it's game over. But if that ring's still pushed out a little bit, you can tap on that ring around through there, and sometimes they'll break loose too. Or after you soaked it in diesel, you can add a little heat. But, you know, you have to be kind of at your own discretion on that stuff. Because I can't tell you to, you know, burn your pistons, because, you know, that's probably not a good idea. But if you want to put a little light heat on it, it's probably not going to hurt it any at all. I wouldn't take out an acetylene torch and, you know, take out after this, because you don't want to melt the piston. But sometimes a little heat, or like I said, a little tappy around with a small hammer. You don't want to hit that hard enough to even dent it or even scratch anything. If those things are flush with piston, you're going to have fun getting them out. You're going to have to just keep soaking them and stuff until they finally let go. So, at this point, I'm going to get the rest of these bolts cleaned up. And another thing, if you're cleaning stuff like this up, these bolts and stuff, every once in a while and just check these things around, guys. You can already see how some of that stuff's coming clean. It'll take a whole lot of long time, especially with something aggressive. So, got our main studs all cleaned up, and there is some corrosion. This isn't stuff that's going to come off. This is where they let that moisture get in this motor, and it kind of, you know, it's stained this coating on these ARP studs. It won't come off. It won't scratch off. I could probably wire brush it off, but, you know. And sometimes the reducer won't get it spotlessly clean, like, you know, you can see that. But this is just a retainer for the little auxiliary shaft. But it does do a good job at taking all that grease and stuff off these things. So, the slow and tedious work in doing something like this. If you don't spend time to clean this stuff up, guys, you don't have to paint this stuff if you don't want to. And some of you may not like the color I painted this thing. But if you take your time, you clean this stuff up, and you're going to have something nice in the end. Out of something that was cheap. You had to put in the work, but, you know, nothing in life's free, and labor costs money if you have somebody else do it. If you can do it yourself, your time, you can't charge for it, so it's free, right? And I did go in there and wire brush that stuff off him, ARP main bolts. Just in case anybody was curious, it is gone. They're more than clean enough to install. That other stuff is on the outside of that bag. And I probably shouldn't be, you know, dusting it off on top of this motor. But what I'm going to do is I clean these bolts. I'm going to separate this stuff out. Bottom end bolts, I'm going to put them in one bag. Accessory bolts, I'm going to put them in another bag. Just that way, this stuff stays clean. so I got all the bolts cleaned up. I got them bagged. If you use a wire brush like that on the grinder, be very, very careful. You can get hurt. I've done a bunch of them. You know, even I slip up every once in a while and, you know, pay the price. But I got all those cleaned up. I come in there, I cleaned the main caps up, cleaned the bearings up, bagged all that stuff, and put it all in a box. So I'll flip around, I'll show you where we're at and where we're going to stop at for today. And I will be back in the morning. We'll clean up these rods and pistons and the other few little small things that we need to. So when I come back, we'll put these pipe plugs in. I just screwed them in the holes to keep from losing them. I got our water pump painted over here. Got all this stuff cleaned up, our oil pickup tube, our main caps, our bearings. And I just put all this stuff in bags. And I did go ahead and take that oil pump apart and clean it out and made sure the relief valve and everything was free. I do highly suggest, if you're going to freshen up a motor, to go ahead and put a new one in. That's why I didn't cover that. But I did clean that up very well inside. I cleaned up our auxiliary shaft, you know, all this stuff that we're going to have to reuse. And the painted bits I did put down here. I did not bag them, but I'm just going to set them down in there. When I get ready for them, I'll be able to just pull them out of the box and put them on. So, made some pretty good progress so far. We still got a long ways to go. And it's up to you how far you clean this stuff. I highly suggest you go ahead and do the job and clean it up the best you can. But, you do you. Places you don't want to skimp, crankshaft, pistons, rods, bearings, the internals of the block. They need to be clean. Any dirt in there could cause a failure, could cause you problems. And I'm going to show you when we put this thing back together a few ways to avoid having any problems. So I'm going to drop it for today. I'll be back in the morning. Alright guys, next thing we need to try to clean up is this crankshaft. As you can see, we got some rust up here on this front journal and on our crank seal surface and where our other stuff goes on there. The rest of the crank is beautiful. This stuff is just a little, you know, assembly lube. So the first thing we need to do, we need to get this keyway out of here. And sometimes these will just come out easy, and you can tap them lightly and they'll pop up on one end. But I have a feeling this one's not going to be so friendly. Might have to soak that in something or add a little heat to it, get that keyway out. But we need to get it off so we can clean this stuff up. So spray it with a little penetrating oil there. Just going to get a better something to tap this with. See if we can't get it out without damaging it, because if we damage this, we'll have to replace it. We may have to break out some fire. So I'm just going to heat it here a little bit. Try not to get it too hot, but maybe enough to get it broke loose. So I'm going to let you watch me run the torch for 5 minutes, and I'll be back when we get this keyway loose. That took enough effort. Do not want to touch this dude too much because she is very, very hot. But be a good time to clean that out and clean that key up too. So, yeah, it's still pretty warm. So, there's a couple ways you can clean this rust up, guys. Whether you take a Scotch-Brite pad like this and try to lightly scuff it off, And this is usually my first method I'll go to and see if this stuff will clean off. And sometimes it's just a little too heavy for, you know, something like this. Your next option is to go to a sandpaper or an emery cloth, and you want to take and just kind of roll your piece of sandpaper around like this. On stuff like this end, you can just do it by hand, and sometimes that'll clean it up. In most cases, and this is 2500 grit, so it's pretty super fine, and I think it's going to be probably not enough to initially get this off, but I just want to kind of show you a couple different ways here. The third way is you can roll this around, and no matter what you do, you want to spray some kind of lube on it, something like some WD-40 or something in a bottle. And then the other method is you're going to take a string or shoelace or something like this, and what I'll do, I'll roll it around like this, that way you got even contact, and then you'll work it like this around. And most times you have good results doing it this way, but you're going to have to find a grit that will break the rust that you have loose, and then you're going to have to step it down into something fine like 2500 or 1500 grit paper like this. So let me get something a little heavier and we'll clean this stuff up. Alright, get rid of the sticky paper. It's still 400 grit. And you're just going to take and work this back and forth. And this is about the best way you can get an even surface doing this way. And you're just going to work this. And a lot of you might be worried about it taking off too much material. Like I said, this is 400 grit. This is very fine stuff. You're going to have to do a lot of something to cause any damage. Just like honing a cylinder, you're going to have to hone on it for a long time to cause any damage. So I'm just going to keep working this until the rust goes away, or it's smooth and I can't catch a fingernail on it. Sometimes you're going to have staining, and that staining ain't necessarily an indicator of a problem, because rust does pit, guys, and you just want to make sure that you don't have anything rough. That's going to take just a little more work there in that spot, but we're getting pretty close. So I got our crank cleaned up on all three surfaces. It still has a little pitting here. This all looks good. Can't feel anything with your fingernail. Same up here. I went in here in the background and I just hit all this loose flaky rust on this crankshaft with a Scotch-Brite pad. I just kind of rubbed all this down, and now we're ready to clean this crankshaft up. Important note about cleaning the crankshaft. I will have to clean this twice. I'm going to do an initial cleaning, and I'll blow out all our oil feed holes, and all the ones in the mains, and all the ones in the rods, because you want this thing spotlessly clean, because anything that hides in here or on here has potential to get in here where your bearings are. So I'm gonna give this thing an initial bath here in just a few moments. But first, we need to get these pistons up here and get these old rings off of them. So, like I said guys, budget stuff. So, clean up, you use what you got. So, that's what we're doing. So, I'm gonna sit this crank down here on the floor. I always store cranks standing on the end. You wanna make sure they're somewhere where they can't fall over, because it's not good to lay them flat and store them for a long period of time, because they could sag potentially and warp the crank. Might be an old wives' tale, who knows? But I was always taught, you either stand the crank on its end or you hang it from its end. So I'm gonna sit it down here on the floor. We're gonna get our rods and pistons up here and get these old rings off. So we got our rods and pistons right here. So we need to go ahead and try to get these old rings out. And as you can see, this one is still stuck, even though it's popped out in a couple places. We'll save that one to last. But let's take these rings off. I'm just going to spiral them out, kind of like you do when you put them on. And sometimes they'll be stuck. They won't come out. That's the problem with dealing with something like this that has been rusted up. You just want to be mindful, and you don't want to scratch your piston all up. So, like I said, these things were brand new. This ain't never been run and don't have no scarring on it. And probably a good thing I took it apart, because the oil rings are lined up right here. These separator rings. Anytime on a piston ring, you always want to make sure this stuff is staggered. And I did go ahead and order a new set of rings for this motor. So, let's get these old ones off. We'll give these an initial pre-clean. And this dirty diesel, in my pan here, you can see it's dirty because, you know, this stuff's been floating around in there. And you can see the rust down in the grooves. We're going to have to clean that stuff up best we can too, and any corrosion around them. So, a lot of these are very well stuck still, but we have to just try to get them out best we can. Sometimes they might break when you take them out. That'll be handy here in a little while. Don't throw them broken rings away. But you kind of get the gist of what's going on here. We just need to get the old off in preparation for new. So I'm going to finish doing this and I'll be back. Alright, now that I got all the old rings off of all the pistons, I'm just going to take this Scotch-Brite, guys. And since this thing was so corroded around through here, I'm just going to take my Scotch-Brite and kind of use it and this diesel to kind of rough clean these pistons up a little bit around the crowns. And the reason why I told you don't throw away any of them broke rings is sometimes they're good. You can go in here and just run them around. Make sure, especially on an old piston, you can run them around these ring grooves and make sure they're clean. Or in a case like this with a new piston that was corroded, when they break, you get a little sharp edge, and that just helps clean this stuff out. You don't go in here buck wild, and you don't want to wire brush it, but you do want to make sure that you can go in here and kind of clean some of this stuff out, and that'll keep it from binding the rings up when you put your motor together. So, like I said, these are in really good shape. Like I said, they're new. They just been in the motor a little bit. And I'm just going to use this as kind of like a scrub brush. But as I go, I'm gonna go ahead and take the rod bearings out of them. I'm just gonna set them to the side over here. Just take this as an opportunity to kind of just pre-wash this stuff. And then take some of the dirty oily film off of it. And any of the crusty, rusty stuff that we had before. When I get the initial part of it done here, I'll go back in and we'll clean these with something clean instead of this. And I'll probably bring my crank up here and wash it off with this dirty stuff too before we change over to some clean. But once I get these kind of pre-cleaned here, I'm just going to set them off to the side also. Clean pan, clean towel, clean diesel. I know it don't look clean down there, but that pan's like stained. And that stuff is not coming out. So what I'm going to do at this point, I'm just going to take this clean and I'm going to rinse as much of the dirty off of this as I can. Just want to kind of flush all the bad out of it. Clean all the stuff we can. So get this stuff where it's clean as it possibly can get. Once it's cleaned out, I'm just going to put it over here on a clean towel and let it kind of just naturally drip out and dry out. And oil from this diesel will keep all this stuff from corroding or rusting, so we won't have to spray it down with no WD-40 or anything. And the diesel won't hurt anything. Just help protect it. This diesel is mostly oil anyway. Just repeat this process for all 4 pistons. If you've done a good job cleaning the first time with the dirty stuff, then this should do a good job of cleaning it the second time. Because the more you clean it, the less chance you get that it's going to be dirty in the end. I'll continue this process and I'll be back. And we're going to move on to our crankshaft. As you can see, our diesel still looks clean. There's a reason. Because we done pre-cleaned it. What I didn't do was pre-clean this crankshaft. Because that diesel was pretty dirty before. And I'm just going to go here and just kind of wipe this thing down and wash all this loose rust off. There's plenty of it on this crank. And I'm just going to work on flushing it down. We'll clean this crank again before we put it in the engine. Get this thing good and cleaned up. So it's a little while later, I get this stuff cleaned up. While we can still see some of that corrosion pits on that aluminum, it is good and smooth. Our ring lands are good and clean between all these. I don't think we're going to have any issues there. As you can see, that diesel, I flipped these over, let them drain off. That diesel will help protect this. We do need to bag these to keep them clean, and I'll do that here in just a moment. Same way with our crankshaft, it cleaned up pretty good where we polished rust off of it. We still got some staining in here, but our main journal cleaned up good. All the rest of our journals look good. There's a little dust. Kitty cat hair from Daisy, but I'm gonna blow this off and I'm gonna bag it too, and then we'll sit it in here once it's bagged, and I'll just set the oil pan back on it and bag the motor back until the rest of our parts get here. But there's one other thing we need to go ahead and do, and that's to get these plugs in here that I talked about earlier in this video. So let's get to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take this, an 8mm Allen like this. I'm just going to take some thread sealer. As usual with this stuff, it's hard to get the lid off. I'm not going to put a whole lot on it, guys. I'm just going to put just a little bit right there on the side of the threads. And as you tighten this down, now track it in there. You do not want any of this stuff on this face of this plug or near the end thread on it, because it will push up in to your oil passages. And you don't want that stuff in your oil. And I'm just going to go in here and snug these up. Then I'll go back with a towel. Or a piece of a towel, because that didn't want to tear. I'll just kind of go back in here, wipe this stuff off. I'm going to have to get a real towel. Just wipe this off on the outside out here, and just wipe off your paint. That way it just looks better. I'll repeat this process with the other plug. Over here, if you drop it on the floor, you want to make sure it's clean before you put it back in there. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this thread sealer and just put it on one side of that plug. Make sure we don't get it in that first thread on it. And bring it back in here. Run it down. And we're just going to take our towel, and any of that external, I'm just going to wipe it off. That's how I'm going to install them pipe plugs. I've still got one more to do. I'm going to have to roll this motor over. I'm going to do that one off camera, and then I'll be back. And get this thing rolled over. So those two are sealed off. And then this little fella back here is sealed off too. So at this point, I'm ready to start picking this stuff up, get this bagged, get that crankshaft bagged. And I'm going to set the crank back in the block, but in a plastic bag. Make sure no dirt gets transferred between the two. So guys, got the crank bagged up, set in the block for some safe storage. I'm going to stick the oil pan back on there and bag the motor with another clean plastic bag. I've got the pistons over here tied up in a plastic bag where they can't get dusty or dirty. So that's an important thing. If you're not going to be able to initially put this back together after you clean all this stuff, it might be a day or two or a week or two. You want to make sure that you put it in something that is clean to protect it. And then before you assemble it, you'll clean it again. Just to make sure everything is safe and clean. Clean, clean, clean is the name of this game. So guys, that's about where I'm going to leave this video off. We're still waiting on some parts, and when they come in, we'll go back in to put this thing together. Hopefully in our next video, we'll at least have a short block put together. I probably am going to send the cylinder head to come with this motor to the machine shop just to have it checked out again. Just for, you know, because cylinder head stuff, that's an art. and I might have it ported. I don't know. This is a budget project, so I don't have a whole lot of money put in it, and we need to try to get the best bang for our buck out of this. So I figure we're well on our way to building a 350 or 400 horsepower 2.3 turbo. So if you haven't yet, make sure you like this video, share them with your friends. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button because it does help the channel grow. If you are a subscriber, I greatly appreciate you guys. And I look forward to everybody's comments down below. So until next video, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.